If you were to book a flight to Japan tomorrow,
Sounds pretty good right about now.
right, just drop everything and go.
Yeah.
But say you take a bus out to Yamanashi Prefecture and you decide to hike to the summit of Mount Fuji.
Mm-hmm.
You would be treated to, I mean, honestly, one of the most pristine, iconic views on planet Earth.
Oh, absolutely.
You'd walk up these sweeping trails of volcanic ash, and you'd pass through these beautiful, really austere Shinto shrines up at the peak. And you would likely feel this profound sense of ancient, untouched history.
Like it's been that way forever.
Exactly. It feels like a landscape that has just been exactly this way since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
But what you wouldn't see, what is completely invisible to the modern tourist, are the hundreds of smashed Buddhist statues buried just beneath the surface of that ash.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see the remnants of a 1,000-year-old religion that was literally made illegal overnight.
It is the ultimate illusion of permanence, really.
Yeah.
We constantly project our desire for timelessness onto nature, especially mountains.
Because they're big rocks. They don't move.
Right, they feel eternal. But the Mount Fuji we interact with today is actually a highly curated, politically engineered landscape.
It's designed.
Completely designed. It is the product of a massive, sudden, and frankly often violent restructuring that took place just over 150 years ago.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We are exploring this incredible phenomenon we are calling the Meiji Rupture.
Yes.
Our mission for this deep dive is to take a massive stack of source materials. We're talking historical edicts, archaeological reports from the mountain itself, deeply researched regional histories.
Really fascinating stuff in there.
It is. And we're going to use all of that to understand the dramatic transformation of Mount Fuji's religious landscape during the 1868 Meiji Restoration.
And, we should probably establish right up front that we're going to look at this with strict historical equanimity.
Right. No good guys and bad guys.
Exactly. It is very tempting, especially when you hear about ancient statues being smashed or practices being banned, to frame this as a story of, evil, soulless modernizers coming in and destroying the heroic, pure traditionalists.
Right, like an 80s movie plot.
Yeah, exactly. But history is rarely a cartoon. What we are actually looking at is a complex collision.
Between who?
Well, on one side, you have a nation that is absolutely terrified of Western imperialism, desperately trying to build a modern unified state just to survive.
Okay.
And on the other side, you have local people, priests and villagers living on a volcano, just trying to survive the shockwaves of this massive government policy and, protect their community's heritage.
Right. Everyone is just trying to survive.
Hmm.
I want to start by understanding the before picture, though.
Sure.
Because to really grasp the magnitude of this shockwaves, I feel like we have to understand the glass it shattered, right?
That's a good way to put it.
The sources keep referring to this concept called Shinbutsu Shugu. What exactly was the religious ecosystem on Mount Fuji before 1868?
So, Shinbutsu Shugo translates roughly to the syncretism or the fusion of kami and Buddhas.
Okay, so Shinto and Buddhism.
Right. For over a millennium, Shinto, which is the indigenous spiritual belief system of Japan, centered on nature spirits called kami.
Right.
And Buddhism, which arrived later from the mainland, they weren't just coexisting.
They weren't just neighbors.
No, they weren't just sharing real estate on the mountain. They were functionally fused into a single, cohesive religious worldview.
Wait, I'm trying to picture that. When you say fused, do you mean people just went to a Shinto shrine on Tuesday and a Buddhist temple on Wednesday?
Not quite.
Or do you mean the religions literally bled into each other?
The latter, but honestly even deeper than that. In the medieval Japanese mind, there were two manifestations of the exact same ultimate reality.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was this prevalent theological framework called Honji Sujaku.
Honshi Sujaku.
Yeah. And the basic idea was that the Buddhist deities were the original universal essence, the fundamental truth of the universe.
The core reality.
Right. But when those universal Buddhas wanted to save the people of Japan, they manifested locally in the form of Shinto kami.
Wait, okay. So the local nature god is just the universal Buddha, putting on a local disguise so people can understand it.
Precisely. That's exactly it. So on Mount Fuji, the local Shinto kami of the mountain was known as Asama Okami, or often associated with the goddess Kaguya Hime.
I've heard of Kaguya Hime, the tale of the bamboo cutter.
Yes. Very famous folklore. But simultaneously in this system, that very same mountain was the home of the supreme cosmic Buddha, Danichi Nyorai.
Oh, wow.
So to the people living there, worshipping Kaguya-hime and worshipping Dainichi Nyorai, they were the exact same act. You couldn't untangle them.
It's literally the same being.
Exact.
And according to the archaeological sources we have, this wasn't just a mental concept. It was physically mapped onto the dirt and rock of the mountain itself.
Oh, heavily mapped.
The sources say the mountain was treated as a giant mandala. Now, I know the word mandala gets thrown around a lot in pop culture, usually just meaning like a pretty circular pattern you'd color in an adult coloring book.
Right, right.
But how does a mandala actually function in this religious context? And how do you turn a 12,000-foot volcano into one?
Well, a mandala in this context is essentially a geometric map of the Buddhist cosmos.
Okay.
It's a literal diagram showing the arrangement of different realms, deities, and, states of enlightenment.
Like a blueprint of the universe.
Yes. And on Mount Fuji, they took this two-dimensional cosmic map and physically laid it over the three-dimensional topography of the mountain.
Oh, wow. So they assigned physical locations.
Absolutely. The crater at the very summit, that wasn't just a volcanic vent to them. It was physically considered the inner sanctuary of Dainichi Nyorai.
So the closer you get to the crater, the closer you are to the literal center of the universe.
Exactly. And the jagged peaks that form the rim of the crater.
Yeah.
There are 8 prominent ones. In the syncretic tradition, those 8 peaks were mapped onto 8 Buddhist figures.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, you had Shaka Dake, which was a peak named after the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama.
Right.
You had Kannon Dake, named after the Bodhisattva of compassion.
So every piece of rock has a specific theological meaning.
Every single piece. So when a pilgrim climbed Mount Fuji in, say, the year 1800, they weren't just going on a tough hike for the view.
They were physically walking through a theological diagram.
Right. The grueling physical effort of the climb, the cold, the altitude, it was a literal mechanism for achieving spiritual enlightenment.
Man, so we have this incredibly rich, deeply intertwined spiritual ecosystem. It has been operating like this for 1,000 years.
1,000 years, yeah.
It's baked into the rocks, the maps, the architecture, the daily lives of the people. And then we hit the brick wall.
The Meiji Restoration.
Right. The year is 1868. It's the 4th year of the Kyo era, literally the dawn of the Meiji period. The new imperial government takes power in Tokyo, and they issue a policy called Shinbutsu Bunri.
The separation of Shinto and Buddhism.
Right. And this is the catalyst for the entire rupture. The government issues this edict declaring that Shinto and Buddhism must be completely separated.
Yes.
But hold on a second, that makes no sense mechanically. You just explained that these two religions are the exact same entity in the minds of the people.
They are.
It's like taking a baked cake out of the oven, handing someone a pair of tweezers, and saying, okay, now extract the flour from the eggs.
That is a perfect analogy. It is fundamentally impossible.
Right. How do you even legislate the separation of something that has been fused for 10 centuries? And I guess more importantly, why? Why did the new government suddenly care so much about theological purity?
Well, to understand the why, you really have to look at the massive geopolitical terror of 1868.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Japan had just been forcibly opened to the world by Western gunboats.
Commodore Perry and the Black Ships.
Exactly. After centuries of deliberate isolation, suddenly these massive, technologically advanced foreign warships are in their harbor.
Telling them to open up for trade or else.
Right. And the leaders of the new Meiji government, they look around the globe and they see European empires carving up China. They see them colonizing all of Asia.
Oh, so they're looking at their neighbors falling like dominoes.
Yes. They realized, with absolute clarity, that if Japan didn't modernize and unify immediately, they would be colonized next.
So it wasn't just a political shift. It was an existential panic.
Absolute existential panic. And to build a strong, modern nation-state that could resist the West, they needed a unified national identity.
Everyone needs to be on the exact same page.
Right. They needed everyone pulling in the exact same direction. And they decided the best way to achieve that was to center the entire nation around the absolute divine authority of the emperor.
Okay. And where does Shinto come into that?
So, Shinto provided the ideological mechanism for the emperor's power. According to ancient Shinto mythology, specifically texts like the Kojiki, the emperor, is the direct, literal descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu.
Right, the divine right to rule.
Exactly. By elevating Shinto as the pure, original, native religion of Japan and making it the official state ideology, they made the emperor's rule unquestionable.
I see. So suddenly Buddhism becomes a problem.
A massive problem. Because Buddhism originated in India, right? It traveled through China and Korea and came to Japan later.
It's an import.
Yes. To these 19th century nation builders, Buddhism was a foreign import that had polluted the pure indigenous Japanese spirit.
Wow.
It was messy. It had all these divided loyalties to different sects and temples, and it didn't inherently serve the narrative of the emperor's divine supremacy.
Right. A Buddhist monk isn't necessarily loyal to the Shinto sun goddess.
Exactly. Therefore, to purify the state, they felt they had to purify the religion. Shinto had to be extracted, elevated, and weaponized for nation building. Everything else had to go.
Which brings us back to the tweezers and the cake.
Yes.
The government issues this Shinbutsu Bunri edict. But an edict is just a piece of paper in Tokyo. How does this actually play out on the ground, thousands of feet up on the side of a volcano?
Well, it plays out through a process known as Haibutsu Kishaku.
Haibutsu Kishaku.
Yes, which roughly translates to the physical eradication or destruction of Buddhism. When you ask how they unscrambled the egg, the answer is through intense bureaucratic coercion and physical violence.
Wow.
The government literally sent inspectors and officials to these sacred sites with explicit orders to scrub them clean.
And the sources detail exactly what that scrubbing looked like. We talked earlier about those 8 peaks named after Buddhist figures.
Right.
The government didn't just ask nicely for people to stop using the names. They legally erased them.
Yes.
Shakadake, the peak of the historical Buddha, was officially renamed Shirayama-dake. Kannon-dake became Mishima-dake.
They literally sent surveyors out to redraw the maps. They threatened local guides with severe punishment if they were caught using the old Buddhist terminology.
They were stripping the landscape of its memory.
You're stripping it bare.
And it wasn't just names on a map. The physical architecture was targeted. The sources talk about the Dinichi-do, which was this massive revered hall dedicated to the cosmic Buddha right at the summit of the mountain.
Right at the top.
Right. It was forcibly seized, stripped of its Buddhist identity, and renamed the Asamagu, turning it into a state-approved Shinto shrine.
Imagine the visceral reality of that moment for the locals. You have government officials marching up a mountain to like 3,700 meters.
That's a huge trek.
Yeah, and they bring carpenters and laborers. They are taking down centuries-old Buddhist statues, throwing them into the ash. They're burning sutras, chiseling Buddhist inscriptions off of stone monuments.
Oh my God.
Just imagine the sheer sound of destruction echoing around the crater.
I really want you, the listener, to try and put yourself in the shoes of a local villager for a second. Just imagine the place of worship in your town, the place your grandparents were married in, the place you find spiritual comfort.
Yeah.
Imagine waking up one morning to find government troops there, tearing down the altars, dragging the sacred objects out into the street and smashing them. And then they hang up a new sign with a new name, telling you that your entire spiritual history was a lie and is now illegal.
It's devastating.
The sheer psychological violence of that is hard to overstate. It's a total rupture of reality.
And, you know, that rupture wasn't just emotional, it was deeply institutional.
What do you mean?
Well, if the geography itself is being erased, the actual institutions that rely on that geography are fundamentally threatened. They lose their reason to exist.
Right.
And the sources point us to a primary example of this institutional destruction, Moriyama-kuchi.
Let's dive into Moriyama. This place was the historic epicenter of something called Shugendo on the Fuji trails. What exactly is Shugendo, and why was Moriyama so incredibly important?
So Shugendo is perhaps the ultimate, most intense expression of that Shinto-Buddhist fusion we've been talking about. It translates to the way of ascetic practice and miracles.
Ascetic practice, so harsh discipline.
Very harsh. It's essentially Japanese mountain asceticism. The practitioners are called yamabushi.
Yamabushi.
Right. And they would go into the deep mountains, live in extreme conditions, meditate under freezing waterfalls in the dead of winter, and just undergo these intense physical trials.
And the mechanism behind that is the belief that the mountain is sacred, right? By suffering in the sacred space, you absorb its power.
Precisely. They believed that by pushing their physical bodies to the absolute limit within this mandala landscape, they could attain actual supernatural spiritual powers.
Oh, wow, like magic.
Yeah, they were seen as healers, exorcists, and guides. And for centuries, the village of Moriyama, and specifically the temple complex of Kuchi, was the absolute nerve center for this practice on the southern approach to Mount Fuji.
So they were the gatekeepers.
They were the ultimate gatekeepers. If
Mhm.
you were a pilgrim coming from the south, you didn't just start hiking up a trail, you went through Moriyama.
You had to check in.
Exactly. The Yamabushi would guide you, they would perform purification rituals for you, and of course you would pay them for lodging and spiritual protection.
Oh, so it was a big business, too.
A massive business. Chuji was wealthy, powerful, and deeply embedded in the local economy. It was an independent powerhouse of syncretic religion.
Which means when the Meiji government decides that syncretic religion is a threat to national unity, Murayama has a giant target painted on its back.
It was enemy number one. In 1872, which is the 5th year of the Meiji era, the government escalated their policy. They didn't just tell the Shugendo practitioners to, separate their Shinto from their Buddhism.
They went further.
They issued an edict banning Shugendo entirely.
Let me challenge that, actually.
Yeah.
I understand banning Buddhism because it's foreign.
Like,
But Shugendo incorporates a lot of native mountain worship, right?
it does.
So why outright outlaw it? Why not just force them to rebrand it as pure Shinto?
Because Shugendo represented uncontrolled, localized power.
Ah,
The Meiji state wanted a neat, tidy, highly regulated Shinto priesthood that answered directly to the government bureaucracy in Tokyo.
and these guys were not tidy.
Not at all. The Yamabushi were wild. They were charismatic figures who operated in the deep mountains, claiming to have magical powers, and they commanded immense respect and loyalty from the common people.
Oh, I see.
The state looked at them and saw a massive, unregulated network of potential subversion. You can't have an absolute emperor if the peasants are looking to a mountain ascetic for their miracle.
Right. The emperor needs a monopoly on miracles.
Exactly. So they abolished it.
And the dismantling of Fuji was incredibly systematic. The sources show they completely gutted the institution.
Completely gutted
They
it.
stripped away all its Buddhist functions, demoted it, and rebuilt it as a purely Shinto entity called the Moriyama Sengen Shrine. But they didn't stop there. They subordinated it. They made it a sub-shrine under the control of the main Sengen Taihisha shrine down in the valley, which was heavily aligned with the new state.
They essentially staged a hostile corporate takeover.
It really is like that.
Yeah, they liquidated all the assets, fired the original staff, and turned this ancient powerhouse into a branch office.
And perhaps the most fascinating detail of this takeover is the forced deity swap.
Oh, yes.
This goes right to the core of how the state dictated belief.
The theological re-engineering of the mountain. It's wild.
According to the sources, for centuries, the people at Moriyama revered Kaguya-hime as the primary deity of Mount Fuji.
Right.
In their specific Shugendo belief system, Kaguya-hime was viewed as the local manifestation of the cosmic Buddha, Danichi Nyorai.
Correct.
But the Meiji government comes in and says, no, your goddess is incorrect. From now on, the official deity of Mount Fuji is Konohana Sakuya-hime.
Yeah, just completely swapping out the god you pray to.
And we have to ask why. Why does the government in Tokyo care which specific mythical princess the locals in a mountain village pray to?
The answer is pure political legitimacy. Kaguya-hime, as revered in Moriyama, was intrinsically tied to Buddhist cosmology and local Shugendo folklore.
She was part of the old world.
She was part of the messy, unregulatable past.
But Konohana Sakuya-hime,
Konohana Sakuya-hime appears in the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki.
the state texts.
Yes, the ancient 8th century chronicles that the Meiji government was actively weaponizing to legitimize the emperor. She is firmly embedded in the state-sanctioned Shinto pantheon.
Wow.
So by forcing the locals to swap Kaguya-hime for Konohana Sakuya-hime, the government was physically plugging Mount Fuji into the state's approved ideological grid.
They were standardizing the religion.
Exactly. They were saying, this mountain does not belong to your local traditions anymore. It belongs to the emperor's narrative.
This is where I start to wonder about the human reaction to all this.
Yeah.
I mean, if a government force comes into your town, bans your profession, seizes your temple, and tells you the god you've prayed to your entire life is illegal.
You would expect a riot.
Yeah. You would expect blood in the streets. You would expect an armed uprising.
It's a very natural expectation, but that isn't actually what the historical and archaeological records show.
Really? What happened?
What we see instead is a masterclass in quiet, desperate preservation.
Okay.
The locals of Moriyama weren't fools. They saw the Haibutsu Kishaku movement, the destruction of Buddhism sweeping across the rest of the country. They knew government troops had guns and the backing of a rapidly modernizing army.
So an armed revolt would just be suicide.
It would have meant the complete annihilation of their village.
So instead of fighting, they went into hiding.
Exactly. The sources document this incredible, almost covert mobilization. Before the inspectors could fully lock down the mountain, villagers rushed up the trails.
Just sprinting up the volcano.
Yeah, they were desperately trying to save whatever they could carry. They hauled heavy, priceless Buddhist statues down from the mountain paths and the summit.
But once you bring them down to the village, what do you do with them? I mean, if the inspectors find a giant Buddhist statue in your living room, you're going to prison.
Right, it's incredibly dangerous contraband at that point. This is where we see true local genius.
Okay, tell me.
The sources highlight two incredibly significant artifacts. Two massive, magnificent statues of Denichi Nyorai. One was carved in the year 1259, and the other in 1478.
Wow. Irreplaceable historical and spiritual treasures.
Completely irreplaceable. The villagers took these statues and several others and hid them inside a specific wooden hall in the village.
Just normal building.
Yeah, an old hall. They boarded up the doors and windows tight, and then they deployed a brilliant psychological defense mechanism.
What do they do?
They renamed the building the Enma-do.
The Enma-do, the Hall of Enma.
Yes.
Wait, the Buddhist king of hell.
Exactly. In Buddhist mythology, Enma is the terrifying judge of the underworld who rips the tongues out of liars and sentences souls to eternal torment.
That is absolutely brilliant.
Isn't it? By officially designating this boarded-up building as the Hall of the King of Hell, the villagers created a massive cultural taboo.
I'm just trying to picture a low-level Meiji bureaucrat showing up with his clipboard, right?
Yeah.
He's tasked with finding hidden Buddhist artifacts. He walks up to this dark, boarded-up building, and the locals just casually say, "Oh, you don't want to go in there? That's the domain of the King of Hell. Go ahead if you want, but your soul is forfeit."
Exactly. And these bureaucrats, even if they're working for a modernizing government, they still grew up with these superstitions.
Yeah, the bureaucrat probably just checks his box and moves on to the next village.
Most likely, yeah. They used religious superstition to defeat state bureaucracy.
It is a stunning example of local agency. The Meiji state issued these sweeping absolute decrees from Tokyo, projecting this image of total, unquestionable control. But on the ground, in the mud, in the ash of the mountain, human beings found creative, subversive ways to navigate the rupture and protect the core of their heritage.
And the proof that it worked is that those statues survived.
They really did.
Yeah, they were kept safe in the dark for decades. We only know about them because they survived into the modern era and were eventually rediscovered.
That is incredible. Okay, so the villagers are executing these covert operations in the dead of night, hiding statues in the Hall of Hell.
Yeah.
But that's the common folk.
Right.
What about the people at the very top of the food chain? The chief priests, the head monks, the leaders of these massive institutions. They couldn't just hide behind a boarded-up door. They were the public faces of the old regime. How did the leadership survive this?
The leadership faced a complete institutional and existential crisis. To really grasp the mechanics of this, we need to look at the Fuji clan.
The Fuji clan.
Yeah.
The family that quite literally had the mountain in their name.
Yes. For 44 generations, which is an almost incomprehensible span of time dating back to the medieval era, the Fuji clan had held the title of Daiguji.
Daiguji.
Yes, this was the supreme chief priest of the main Sengen Taishu shrine. It was an unbroken hereditary dynasty.
But the Meiji government, in its drive to modernize, institutes a policy called Shinshoku Seishuhaishi.
Right, the abolition of hereditary priesthood.
Again, I have to ask why. If the state wants to promote Shinto, and this family has literally been running the biggest Shinto shrine in the region for centuries, why fire them? Wouldn't you want experienced management?
You would think so, but not if their authority comes from their bloodline rather than the state.
Oh, I see.
Think about the mechanics of building an absolute centralized government. If a local populace obeys the Daiguji because his family has ruled the shrine for 800 years, their loyalty is to the Fuji clan.
Not to the emperor in Tokyo.
Exactly. To unify the nation, the Meiji leaders had to break all alternate nodes of power.
They had to clear the board.
They abolished the samurai class, they abolished the feudal domains, and they abolished hereditary priests. From now on, the state would appoint all shrine officials, and they could be transferred or fired at will.
So, 44 generations of history, purpose and power just wiped out with a stroke of a pen.
Gone overnight.
The 44th generation leader, a man named Fuji Shigemoto, suddenly finds himself effectively unemployed and structurally irrelevant.
And this is where the sources provide a deeply illuminating detail about how people navigated the chaos of this era.
What did he do?
During the Boshin War, which was the brief civil war between the old shogunate forces and the new imperial forces that cemented the Meiji Restoration, Fuji Shigemoto, the deposed chief priest, actually joins a militia.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
The sources mention the Sunshu Sekishintai. It was a local paramilitary group formed right there in the Fujinomiya region.
That's the one.
But here's the crazy part. He joins this militia to fight for the new imperial government.
Yes, he does.
The exact same government that is actively stripping his family of their 44th-generation birthright. I'm struggling to understand the logic there. Why pick up a gun for the people taking your power?
It seems contradictory until you look at it through the cold, hard lens of political survival.
Okay, break it down.
Fuji Shigemoto was reading the room. The shogunate was dead. The old world was never coming back.
He knew the writing was on the wall.
Exactly. The imperial forces were the new reality. If the Fuji clan was going to have any standing, any wealth, or any relevance whatsoever in the new Meiji society, they had to prove their absolute, unquestionable utility and loyalty to the emperor right then and there.
Wow.
Raising a militia to fight for the imperial cause was a desperate, calculated gamble to secure a seat at the new table.
It's the ultimate pivot.
It really is.
But this mobilization creates a massive logistical problem back at the shrine.
Yeah.
The Daiguji is off marching with the militia. The ritual functions of this massive, crucial shrine are suddenly completely vacant.
Right. Someone has to mind the store.
And this brings us to what I think is the most fascinating character study in our sources. The Beto.
Oh, absolutely. The Beto.
Who was the Beto?
The Beto was the title for the chief Buddhist monk at the shrine complex. Remember, because this was a syncretic institution, the Shinto Daiguji and the Buddhist Beto worked in tandem.
Like co-CEOs.
Basically. The Beto at the time of the rupture was a monk named Kenko from the Hoto-in temple.
Okay, so Kenko sees the world ending around him.
Uh-huh.
He sees Buddhism literally being criminalized.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees his Shinto counterpart, the Daiguji, joining the Sekishintai militia to secure his future.
Right.
So Kenko thinks, that's my ticket. I need to do exactly that.
And he tries. He really tries. Kenko formally petitions to join the Sekishintai militia alongside the Fuji clan. He wants to march for the emperor and prove his loyalty to the new regime.
But the government looks at his application and rejects him flat out.
They absolutely deny him.
Why? Was he too old?
No, the mechanism for that denial is purely ideological. To the leaders of the new state militia, Kenko is a Buddhist monk. He wears Buddhist robes, he has a shaved head, he chants foreign sutras. He is the walking embodiment of the ideological pollution they are trying to purge from the nation.
So his very existence is a problem.
In the eyes of the pure Shinto state, a Buddhist monk has no place in an imperial army. His identity completely invalidates his loyalty.
Okay, stop and think about Kenko's position here for a second. His religion is being actively purged by the state. His lifelong colleague has gone off to war to align with the new rulers. He tried to join them, and the state explicitly told him, no, your existence is incompatible with our new country.
Yeah, it's a terrifying spot to be in.
What does a person even do in that situation?
He does the only thing left to do. He executes one of the most drastic, jarring, personal transformations documented in our sources.
What does he do?
Kenko legally and formally secularizes.
Wait, how does a high-ranking monk just stop being a monk? I mean, this isn't like changing your major in college. These are deeply held, lifelong vows. Does he just wake up and say, never mind? Did the government actually buy this?
Surprisingly, yes. The government provided a legal off-ramp for Buddhist clergy called kyuzoku, which basically means returning to secular life.
Oh, they wanted them to quit.
They actively encouraged it because it weakened the Buddhist institutions. The mechanics of it were very visceral, though. Kenko had to formally file paperwork renouncing his vows.
Wow.
He had to let his hair grow out from the traditional shaved head. He took off his Buddhist robes forever. He abandoned his religious name, Kenko.
His entire identity.
Gone. And he adopted a brand new, highly patriotic, aggressively Shinto-sounding secular name, Fuji Jinichiro.
Fuji Jinichiro.
Yes. And with this near secular identity, he pivots back to the very shrine he used to serve as a monk.
You're kidding.
Nope. He re-enters the hierarchy as a state-approved, Shinto-aligned minor official.
I just can't get over the awkwardness of that reality. Just imagine you are a local villager. On Sunday, Kenko the monk, with a shaved head and Buddhist robes, gives a sermon on the teachings of the Buddha. On Wednesday, the government outlaws Buddhism. And on Friday, you go to the shrine, and there's a guy with hair wearing Shinto garb, calling himself Fuji Shinichiro, performing state-approved rituals for the emperor. And it's the exact same guy.
It's profound cognitive dissonance. It must have been so surreal.
It's like a legacy CEO realizing that their entire industry has just been outlawed by the federal government.
That's a good comparison.
But instead of going down with the ship, they instantly file papers to change their company name, entirely pivot their product line, change their own legal name, and rehire themselves as the manager of this new enterprise.
Exactly. It's not about faith anymore. It's about absolute desperate pragmatism. You do what you have to do so you don't starve, and that is the lived reality of the Meiji Rupture. It wasn't just abstract theology debated in fancy rooms in Tokyo.
It was real people.
It was individuals like Kenko, men who had spent decades mastering esoteric Buddhist texts, suddenly throwing it all away, donning unfamiliar Shinto garments and reciting new prayers just to maintain some fragile semblance of order and keep a roof over their heads.
Man. But even with Kenko's desperate pivot and the Fuji clan's political maneuvering, the fundamental architecture of the mountain was still broken.
It was shattered.
The hereditary priests had lost their monopoly. The monks had either fled or secularized. The Shugendo practitioners at Moriyama were outright banned. This creates a massive, gaping vacuum on the slopes of Mount Fuji.
A huge power vacuum.
The traditional gatekeepers, the people who mediated the mountain for the public for 1,000 years, are just gone.
And as we know, nature, politics, and religion all abhor a vacuum. With the old guard swept away, the spiritual real estate of Mount Fuji was suddenly wide open.
And the sources show exactly who stepped in to fill that void. Because the traditional mediators were neutered, a completely new breed of religious organization rose to prominence.
Yes.
The texts specifically highlight the explosive growth of newly founded, purely Shinto-aligned sects.
Right. The most prominent example in the documents is a group called Fushikyu.
Fushikyu.
Yeah, which was officially founded in Meiji 8 or 1875.
And this sect was founded by a charismatic figure named Anano Han. What was his deal? How did he capitalize on the chaos?
Anano Han is a really fascinating figure because he recognized the exact shape of the vacuum, with the Daiguji displaced by the militia mobilization and the rituals at the main Sengen Taisha shrine faltering due to all the chaos. Anano Han literally stepped right into the breach.
He just walked in.
Essentially, he took up the role of chief priest at the Sengen Taisha during this transitional period and ensured the rituals continued. But he didn't just maintain the status quo, he built a movement.
And how did his movement, Fushus, differ from the old Shugendo guys at Moriyama?
It differed in its fundamental alignment with the state. The old Shugendo was messy, Buddhist-tinged, and deeply localized.
Right.
Fushus, on the other hand, was explicitly tailored for the new Meiji era. Anano Han promoted a vision of Mount Fuji that was purified, deeply patriotic, and centered entirely on Shinto deities that supported the imperial narrative.
Oh, so he's singing the government's tune.
Loud and clear. He preached that climbing Fuji wasn't about gaining personal magical powers like the Yamabushi believed.
What was it about them?
It was an act of national devotion. It was a way to purify the Japanese soul in service of the emperor.
Ah, so he essentially packaged Mount Fuji into a theological product that the Meiji government would happily endorse.
Exactly. And the crucial shift here is about access. These new sects, like Fuchigo, didn't need to use the old traditional routes.
Right, they don't need the Yamabushi.
They didn't need to go through the village of Moriyama, and they didn't need the blessing of the old hereditary families. They offered the growing Japanese middle class a new, modernized, completely state-friendly way to interact with their most famous mountain.
And this shift in ideology wasn't just a matter of changing prayers, right?
No, not at all.
It literally rewrote the physical geography of the mountain. The sources point to a massive infrastructural change that perfectly illustrates this.
Yes, the changes were carved directly into the earth. The sources point us to the year 1906, which is Meiji 39. A brand new climbing route was officially opened on the mountain.
What was it called?
It was called the Kakesubata route.
Now, whenever a new road or trail is built, there's always a stated reason. Usually it's about efficiency or safety. Was the Kakesubata route like an easier climb? Was it less prone to rock falls? Why did they spend the money to build a new trail on a mountain that already had established routes for centuries?
Its explicit socially engineered purpose was to bypass the village of Moriyama.
Just to cut them out entirely.
Completely cut them out. For centuries, the Moriyama Trail was the definitive southern route. If you wanted to climb from that side, you had to walk through the village.
You had no choice.
Right. You interacted with the local guides, you bought food from their merchants, you paid for lodging at their inns. The village survived on the economic lifeblood of the pilgrimage.
But in 1906, Moriyama is a problem. Shugendo has been illegal for decades. The village is fundamentally stained by its Buddhist history.
Exactly. Even though they had nominally converted to Shinto shrines, the Meiji authorities and the new state-aligned sects viewed Moriyama as a relic of the corrupt past.
Wow.
So they surveyed a new line, brought in laborers, and carved a new road that bypassed the village entirely.
That is unbelievably ruthless.
It was an act of pure economic strangulation. By diverting the flow of pilgrims onto the Kakasubata route, they starved Moriyama of its income.
They just dried them up.
Yeah, it wasn't just a matter of convenience for hikers. It was the physical manifestation of an ideological purge.
So by choosing to walk the Kaksubata route, a pilgrim was actively participating in the new, modernized, purified vision of Mount Fuji.
Right, and leaving the messy, Buddhist-tainted history behind in the dust.
It's using civil engineering as a political weapon to quietly suffocate a 1,000-year-old community.
It really is.
And I think this brings us to the broader pattern that the sources reveal about Meiji modernization on Mount Fuji.
Yeah, let's look at the big picture.
If we step back and connect all the dots we've discussed today, the Shinbutsu Bunri Edict, the physical destruction of the Haibutsu Kishaku, the banning of Shugendo, the dismantling of the Fuji clan's hereditary rule, the rise of state sects, and finally the bypassing of the old trails, we see a very clear strategy.
What becomes clear is that modernization in this context was not just about blind, wanton destruction.
Right.
It wasn't just anarchic violence against the past.
But it was highly calculated.
It was a masterclass in selective preservation. The Meiji government was incredibly surgical. They looked at the 1,000-year-old religious ecosystem of Mount Fuji, and they systematically dismantled everything that was syncretic, everything that was localized, and everything that relied on hereditary power.
They destroyed the organic, complex, heavily Buddhist religion that had evolved naturally from the ground up.
But they didn't destroy the mountain's sacred status.
No, they preserved and elevated it.
They needed Mount Fuji. You cannot build a unified Japanese nation-state without its most iconic physical landmark.
Right, it's the symbol of Japan.
But they needed it to be a blank slate. They stripped away all the local textures, the complex theologies, the messy human traditions, and they replaced it with a sleek, unified, top-down national narrative.
Wow.
They turned a living, breathing, localized spiritual ecosystem into a pristine, silent monument to the state.
They didn't want to destroy the icon. They just wanted absolute control over what the icon meant.
Precisely. They took a mountain that belonged to the locals and the Yamabushi, and they refashioned it into a mountain that belonged exclusively to the emperor and the nation.
Which brings up a really profound question for you listening to this right now.
Yeah.
We live our lives surrounded by spaces we consider historic or traditional. How often do we look at a landscape, whether it's a famous mountain, a protected forest, or the historic district of an old city, and just assume it has organically existed that way for centuries?
All the time. We do it all the time.
How often do we walk through a space and feel like we are experiencing deep, ancient history without ever realizing that the view we were taking in was heavily curated, edited, and in some cases, violently reshaped by modern political forces?
It fundamentally challenges our concept of what authenticity and tradition actually mean in the modern world.
It really does.
When you realize that the traditional Japanese landscape was largely engineered in the late 19th century, it forces you to look at every historical site with a critical eye.
Absolutely. So let's pull all of these threads together. We set out on this deep dive to explore the Meiji Rupture. And through these sources, we've seen how fundamentally the 1868 restoration shattered the religious world of Mount Fuji.
We examine the impossible, violent reality of the Shinbutsu Bunri policy and the ideological panic that drove the new government to physically eradicate Buddhism from the peaks.
We tracked the targeted dismantling of Moriyama-kuchi and the state's insistence on swapping out the local deity Kaguya-hime for the politically approved Konohana-sakuya-hime.
We saw the structural collapse of the old guard, the end of the Fuji clan's 44-generation rule, the Daiguji joining a militia to survive, and the desperate bureaucratic secularization of monks like Kenko transforming into Fuji Jinichigo.
And we witnessed the rise of state-aligned organizations like Fushikyu, who capitalized on the vacuum and literally paved over the past with bypass routes like the Kakasubata Trail.
But amidst all that top-down destruction, we also saw the incredible, quiet heroism of everyday villagers.
Yes, dragging priceless Denichi Nyorai statues down the mountain and using the fear of the king of hell to protect their heritage from the state.
It is an incredible, complex narrative of power, survival, and the rewriting of geography. But as we wrap up our analysis of these sources, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Something that builds on everything we've uncovered today but brings it right into the present moment.
Today, millions of people, tourists, hikers, and pilgrims from all over the world climb Mount Fuji every single summer.
It's packed.
They lace up their boots, they walk up those sweeping trails of volcanic ash, they pass the pristine Shinto shrines at the summit, and they experience what feels like an ancient, undisturbed communion with nature.
It feels eternal.
But consider this. When you step onto that mountain, you aren't just walking on rock and ash. You are walking through the invisible, meticulously designed architecture of a 19th century political revolution.
That gives me chills.
The space you are moving through was shaped by government edicts, bureaucratic purges, and ideological engineering, just as much as it was shaped by tectonic plates and lava flows.
The true ghost-haunting Mount Fuji isn't just those hidden Buddhist statues locked away in the dark of the Enmadu in the village below.
No.
It's the profound, heavy silence of a 1,000-year history that was deliberately, systematically erased to make way for the modern world.
The physical landscape might look pristine, but the earth remembers exactly what the state tried to force it to forget.
And once you understand the violence and the survival hidden beneath the ash, you can never look at that perfectly iconic snow-capped cone the exact same way again.
Definitely not.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the history behind the landscapes you take for granted, and we will catch you on the next one.